On m'entend? Non.
Oui.
Chers collègues, la séance est ouverte.
The sitting is open. I remind members that they should insert their badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only. Once only. We begin with the debate on the report entitled Safeguarding Human Rights for Future Generations, contained in document 15999, presented by Mr. Simon Moutkan on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. This will be followed by a presentation of an opinion by Mr. Pablo Hispan on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, contained in document 16016. Mr. Moutkan, you have 7 minutes now for the presentation of your report and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. Mr. Mutkan, you have the floor for 7 minutes.
1, 2, parfait. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I'm delighted to be able to present what will be my last report. In fact, it's not mine, but it's Mr. Segonyo, and I am delighted to have you as President and the Chair. It is my honour, therefore, to present to the Assembly a report entirely dedicated to future generations, one of the founding aspects of sustainable development. I would like to start by paying tribute to Mr. Segonyo for the inspiration that he's brought and the dedication that he has brought to this issue, the issue of future generations, but more generally ecology. In recent years, the report states that political decisions today will have a lasting impact on future generations in the respect of their human rights. The report points out that a number of constitutional texts contain very clear references to future generations, and the notion of future generations' equity, solidarity, intergenerational solidarity are terms that are cropping up increasingly before national and international courts when it comes to environmental litigation. The Parliamentary Assembly on a number of occasions has looked into the impact of current political decisions on the rights of future generations. And in particular, I would like to recall the resolution that I was responsible for, anchoring the right to a healthy environment and need for more action on the part of the Council of Europe, but also the resolution the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment, thanks to the Reykjavik Declaration, which reminds us of the responsibilities incumbent on member states when it comes to protecting and enhancing the environment for present and future generations, and which calls on heads of state and government of the Council of Europe member states to be very ambitious, demanding when it comes to transparency, ethics, responsibility, efficacy, and reliability. The report encourages member states to be more ambitious when it comes to safeguarding the rights of future generations. It calls for an integrating approach, taking into account not only environmental concerns, but also questions of socioeconomic inequalities on the rise, public health issues, wars, conflicts, and technological progress, rapid technological progress. Equity and intergenerational solidarity should be our guide, reference points when it comes to any decisions involving young people today and the generations that will be inheriting our planet. The Council of Europe, in the Reykjavik Declaration, recognised the need to move forward when it comes to safeguarding the rights of future generations, and says that the Council of Europe is part of a broader international order. It stresses the importance to set up dialogue with other international organisations and to work together, in particular when it comes to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The Summit for the Future, which will be held in New York in September 2024, in that respect, is a major event which will put forward multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow, a pact for the future. The report takes stock of progress and the limits arising out of recent case law of the European Human Rights Court in the area of the environment. Whatever the potential of these advances in terms of case law, the rapporteur reminds us that protection of the environment by the court is, by definition, indirect because it depends on sort of violations committed under the terms of the convention. Also, the court feels that obligations incumbent on member states in the area of the climate questions their responsibility in respect to developments outside their territory. And this approach, I think, leaves a vacuum which places the convention system not up to our requirements when it comes to protecting the rights of future generations, setting it apart from the Inter-American Human Rights Court, which recognise the extraterritorial nature of obligations incumbent on member states when it comes to human rights as a result of environmental degradation. So efforts are required in order to move ahead with the future standards when it comes to protecting the rights of future generations in the area of the environment. That, I think, is more necessary than ever. The report suggests drawing on Maastricht Treaty when it comes to the rights of future generations, principles that have been drafted by international experts that have looked at the international landscape when it comes to human rights as applicable to future generations, highlighting the fact that human rights don't have any temporal limits and future generations intrinsically are covered by all current human rights. Respecting, protecting and defending the rights of future generations is a question of defending a basic notion protection of human rights, equality and non-discrimination, in other words. The report invites member states of the Council of Europe to use this momentum in order to show leadership and calls for a commitment in favour of this imperative in terms of a discourse that demands that we respect the rights of future generations, looking at the potential the limits of recent case law when it comes to the climate in order to develop less anthropocentric environmental standards. Now, the report of my colleague, Mr. Segonyo, I think is both a summing up, a conclusion of the various reports that I also have been in a position to report before this Assembly. A report on the right to a healthy environment, for example. Through our political action, I think we are defining the degree of suffering or happiness which will be that of future generations. It's not ecologists who say as much, but the scientists here within the Assembly or the national parliaments. Our decisions are going to define or shape the future for future generations, but unfortunately everything would suggest that that future will be a very gloomy one. I also had the privilege of presenting a report on natural disaster. I had the opportunity to visit Turkey, the catastrophe of the century. Tens of thousands died. Natural disasters will be more frequent, more intense as a result of climate change. It does raise issues in terms of protection of our citizens and those of future generations. There's another report that I think is linked to the issue of future generations, has to do with mental health of young people. Today, young generations of today are future generations of tomorrow. Colleagues, we need to listen to them. We need to listen to their fears when it comes to the future climate, fear in terms of job openings, respect for human rights, and I'm thinking in particular of young people who, under Putin's bombs in Ukraine, all those who are suffering socioeconomic inequalities, LGBTIQI plus young people throughout the continent, all these young people living in fear of the future. And it is for us who have responsibility here, but at the Parliamentary Assembly, but also in our national parliaments, to hold out the prospect of a future for these young generations, be it here in Strasbourg or in our national capitals. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Moutquin. Je donne maintenant la parole à Monsieur Ispan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutkan. I now give the floor to Mr. Ispan to present the opinion on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. You have 3 minutes.
Dear Mr. President, dear colleagues, integrating the rights of future generations into legal and policy frameworks encourage the development of laws and regulations that prioritize long-term benefits over short-term gains. It lies at the heart of responsible governance. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights welcomes the timely report prepared by our former colleague, Mr. Segonyo, and the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. Our reporter for opinion, Ms. Hala Verhoeven, unfortunately could not join us today and asked me to present the opinion on her behalf. We fully subscribe to the proposal put forward in the draft resolution. Ms. Verhoeven's opinion, which was unanimously adopted by committee, proposed 3 amendments to strengthen the draft resolution and emphasize the momentum that is being developed by this organization. Firstly, we would like to build upon the leading role of the Council of Europe in identifying and mitigating risks associated with rapid technological advancement, in particular the development of artificial intelligence. Last month, the Committee of Ministers adopted the Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law, and subject of our Assembly's excellent opinion, prepared under the reportership of Mr. Evorstir. Regrettably, the Committee of Ministers did not decide to include the amendments put forward by Assembly, but this should not stop us in our efforts to maximize the instrumental potential. Furthermore, it is proposed to add a reference to one of the Council of Europe's greatest achievements in the field of environmental protection, the Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitats, commonly known as the Berne Convention. The loss of diversity is one of the most menacing threats facing humanity. We consider it imperative that the Assembly expresses its support for the actions of the Standing Committee of Berne Convention, which has just adopted its first strategic plan, which sets out goals for halting the declines in biodiversity. The amendment also refers to a well-established rule of customary international law that obliges states to prevent activities on their territory causing significant harm or damage to the environment of another state or areas beyond national control. I'm very pleased to hear that all these three amendments were unanimously adopted by the Committee on Social Affairs. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Ispan.
Thank you, Mr. Ispan. We now move on to the general debate. I would remind you that we are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We start with the political group representatives. First of all, Lord Blencathra, on behalf of the European Conservatives, for 3 minutes.
The report is extensive and morally well-intentioned. By extensive, I mean it calls for human rights protections for a wide variety of things, from growing socio-economic inequalities, public health emergencies, wars and conflicts, rapid technological advances, intergenerational inequality, and a less anthropocentric view of the environment. Now, I agree that preventing the loss of plant and animal species is vitally important. When a species is wiped out, it is gone forever, and one day one of those species could be vital to our survival. I therefore support Amendment 3 in the Berne Convention. However, before we worry about the human rights of animals, around the world the human species is being murdered, tortured and abused, and that is increasing, not diminishing. They are being abused by the millions in China, Iran, North Korea, Burma, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Pakistan, Syria, Afghanistan, and dozens of other countries. Of course, everyone in this room and this assembly in our Western liberal democracies deplores that. But what are we really doing to stop it? We still trade and carry on normal relations with many of those countries. So what sort of signal does that send to future generations? And this week we've discussed abuses, human rights abuses in Ukraine, real human rights abuses with men, women and children being murdered, raped and tortured. And I just wonder what Ukrainian survivors or their relatives would think if they ever heard that here we are sitting here in our comfortable surroundings and talking about the new so-called human rights abuses of intergenerational inequality when their generations have been murdered. And since when have socio-economic inequalities become an abuse to be corrected by human rights law? I'm afraid that the more causes we add, then the less we will do. And politicians and governments will then talk forevermore on these new issues and neglect the millions suffering genocide, murder, rape and false imprisonment. I suggest that if everything is a human right, then genocide, rape and murder will just disappear in the fog. And if we keep adding to a future wish list, but are failing to stop the current atrocities, then we are not doing any service to future generations, no matter how good and how meritorious the causes in this report are. I submit that future generations will not thank us if we in the Western world make our old and young people equal and have equal rights and equal pensions and an equal part in society. But around the world, and in Europe, we've let millions die because of our neglect of the human rights abuses of genocide, rape, murder, torture, and so on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Grass on behalf of the ALDE Group for 3 minutes. President, colleagues, I would like first of all to express my gratitude to Mr. Sigogno for his thorough and far-sighted report, and indeed to Mr. Mutkan for having presented it for him. Future generations will doubtless bear the brunt of the most stubborn challenges that we are grappling with today: climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution, and the degradation of our soils will have destructive, far-reaching implications for their futures, and as individuals as well as society, we have a moral and ethical obligation to shield them from these threats. This report shines a light on two crucial aspects. First of all, quite rightly, it is imperative to recognise the principle of intergenerational fairness as a guiding principle of all our environmental policies, and all the decisions we take today must take account of the needs and rights of future generations, guaranteeing for them sustainable and environmentally responsible development. Recognition of this principle demands far-reaching altruism, making sure that natural resources and ecosystems are preserved for the benefit of our descendants. Secondly, it is vital that we abandon our anthropocentric view of the world. We need to look at our actions holistically as part of the ecosystem. We have to rethink our practices and recognize the interdependence of all forms of life and consider the impact of everything we do on the environment. And this means that in adopting a new vision, we will have to make far-reaching changes. First of all, work towards the kinds of practices that are respectful of biodiversity and bring about far-reaching changes on the educational, legal and institutional fronts. Ladies and gentlemen, the right to a healthy environment is absolutely crucial for the well-being and future of our young people, and it is an essential requirement which transcends generations and national borders. Thanks to the determined efforts of the Swiss Klimaseniorin, we have new case law establishing a historical precedent, namely the recognition of environmental protection as a human right. And this paves the way to a future that is more respectful of our planet and all its inhabitants. Now, let's leverage that momentum. I am firmly convinced that the Council of Europe has the necessary potential to play the role of a leader when it comes to environmental protection. And let us embrace this fresh impetus. And that is why I'm delighted to announce that in spring 2025 we'll be hosting a parliamentary conference on the environment. It will be organised jointly between our Assembly and the Chamber of Deputies of Luxembourg. Thank you very much.
Merci pour cette annonce.
Thank you very much indeed for that announcement and the commitment of your country. We now move on to Mr. Paul Gavin on behalf of the United European Left. You have the floor.
Not sure. Oh, but it is working. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. On behalf of the United European Left, I want to congratulate the rapporteur on an excellent report on a topic that deserves a much higher billing on this week's schedule. The key theme of safeguarding human rights for future generations has never been more important, given the global threats of war, climate change, and the political drift to tooth and claw capitalism and authoritarian right-wing government across so much of Europe. There are two central recommendations here that our group fully support. Firstly, that states adopt an integrated approach that takes into consideration environmental concerns, along with economic, social and cultural development. And second, that intergenerational equity must be a guiding principle in any decision-making involving children and youth and the generations that will inherit the earth. From our perspective, the implications of these recommendations is that Europe cannot continue to be dominated by an adherence to market-led, neoliberal policies which always put the needs of the market and the few before the needs of the many, and in recent years has become a key driver to war and conflict across our world. One of the key progress points in the Reykjavik Declaration was recognition of the need to move forward in safeguarding human rights for future generations. The rapporteur highlights Resolution 2545 from last year, mainstreaming the human right to a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment with the Reykjavik process. This resolution takes on added importance in the context of the recent European election results and the very real danger of a rowback on the new Green Deal, which has taken so much time to construct. The rapporteur also rightly highlights the woeful failure to date to achieve the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals, alongside growing social economic inequalities, public health emergencies, as well as war and conflicts. We do indeed need reinvigorated multilateralism, but also a realisation that our adherence to a capitalist economic model is entirely at the heart of current failures regarding future generations. An ever less regulated economic model based on greed is leading the entire world to disaster. Before I finish, I do want to respond briefly to Lord Blencathra's comments. I have to say that in a week when the UK government has submitted a legal argument that the International Criminal Court should only have jurisdiction over Hamas and not the Israeli government, in order to protect Israeli war criminals, I honestly don't think he's in the position to offer lectures on human rights to anyone in this chamber. Well done to the rapporteur. It's good to finish on a positive note this week.
Merci, Monsieur Gavan.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. And now on behalf of the Socialist Group, Ms. Estrella, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Colleagues. I feel obliged, although I do that with pleasure and out of friendship. As I say, I feel obliged to underscore the enthusiasm and the ability that Pedro Segoño has brought to the preparation of this report. I'd like to thank Simon Mutkin for having stepped into the breach in order to present the report. The rapporteur of this important report, therefore, is not present with us this morning as he would have liked and I think as he deserved. We all know that political life is unfair and doesn't always reward the best. It is part of the confusion, the complexity of the world that the great Portuguese poet spoke of, Luís de Camões. Thank you, Pedro. You may be absent, but you are not forgotten. Dear colleagues, in a world of constant evolution, it is essential that we think of the future and that we guarantee that future generations will be able to enjoy the same rights and the same freedoms as we do. Those rights include the right to a clean and healthy environment, the right to education, the right to justice, and the right to participate in decisions that will have an impact on their future. The effects of climate change will compromise fundamental rights, such as the right to health, the right to drinking water, or the right to a healthy environment. Drastic measures must therefore urgently be taken in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to promote renewable energy sources. We must put flesh on the bones of the right to a healthy environment, in particular through the adoption of an additional protocol to the European Human Rights Convention, a request that has been voiced by this Assembly. As the rapporteur reminds us, the courts are increasingly now enhancing the protection of future generations, in particular in cases that have to do with the environment and nuclear tests. At the same time, the rapid development of technology raises questions as to privacy, data security, and the ethics of artificial intelligence. We therefore need to produce rules or regulate the protection of our digital rights whilst at the same time promoting responsible innovation. And in that we're talking about the future, future generations have to participate not only in debates but also in political decision-taking. Why not, therefore, create platforms where young people can express their concerns and put forward their solutions? To conclude, the protection of the human rights of future generations is a collective responsibility that requires immediate and concerted action. As parliamentarians, we have the duty to legislate and implement policies that will protect the rights of our children and of the generations to come. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam. And I now call Mr. Robles. Thank you very much indeed, President. First of all, I should like to thank you for this opportunity. By virtue of this report, we can discuss on the most burning issues, climate change and the rights of future generations. We also need to talk about consolidated rights and the ongoing work. We belong to a generation. We should remember that it was our forefathers who worked to establish these rights, socioeconomic rights, cultural rights, human rights, gender rights, which are now reality, but entailed a great deal of work. And that is why this is a challenge for present-day generations. And there is a clear challenge to us all to fight against climate change, to fight for the environment and see to it that we have a sustainable environment to hand down to our children, grandchildren, grandchildren and generations to come, because the pace of destruction and change is alarming. And so, in the light of everything that's been said, it is important that we realize that the challenge of climate change and the environment is at the heart of everything we do for a sustainable world. And we have to look at our lifestyles and whether they are sustainable. And that is why we have to work both for and with younger generations. We have to realize that they are amongst us now and that it is up to them to work towards a better world and a better future. So everything that contributes to global warming, the waste, plastics and the like, affects all of us, because when we eat fish these days, we are ingesting microplastics, and that is going to have a very harmful effect on our health and cause all kinds of new diseases. And then, of course, we have migratory flows, people who are quite simply forced to leave their homes because there is no water because of climate change, and that causes all kinds of social repercussions. So climate change, ingesting plastics, migratory flows, all kinds of challenges that we have to face up to. This report is designed to beef up our leadership, make sure that globally we work both with and for future generations. This is the challenge that faces us, and we need to realize that all of these problems are going to affect future generations. So we shouldn't be selfish and do nothing, contemplate nothing, without being mindful, cognizant of the effects that they will likely have on future generations. So climate change, health, as I say, are all at the center of our challenges. The fight for our planet, for our climate. We have an imperfect world, but we have to respect creation, and it is down to us, to all of our different nations and cultures. Once again, thanks to the rapporteur.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed. We have now heard from the speakers on behalf of political groups, and we can move on to speakers in the general debate, starting with Mr. Emre from Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the rapporteur for this insightful report. In today's world, humanity faces a multitude of complex threats like climate change, geopolitical conflict, the erosion of democracy and human rights, rapid advancement in artificial intelligence, poverty, exclusion, and discrimination. It is crucial to understand that our current actions and policies have profound implications for the fundamental rights of those who will be born decades and even centuries into the future. The actions of present generations inevitably impact future generations. Today, the failure to ensure the fundamental rights for future generations is shaping the future as a major problem. Therefore, the risk of facing serious difficulties in issues such as the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment for future generations, effective democracy and respect for human rights increases. Individuals, states and the international community must recognize their responsibility to address current global challenges in an environment of increased international cooperation. We must also create the necessary conditions to ensure that the needs and interests of future generations are not put at risk by the policies and actions of current generation. As a first condition, we must accept the universality of human rights norms for future generations as well. That is, human rights must apply equally to all people regardless of place and time. In addition, individual states and international community as a whole must respect, protect and fulfill their obligations to future generations. These obligations include preventing threats to fundamental rights, protecting natural ecosystems, taking steps to minimize the negative effects of climate change, preventing the erosion of democracy, preserving peace and ensuring sustainable development. The multiple and interconnected crises facing the world today threatens the rights of both present and future generations. Therefore, states must adopt an integrated approach that takes into account environmental challenges as well as economic, political, social, and cultural policies. Even though a perfect world does not exist, we can work for a better future. Thank you very much.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much. And now I call Ms. Prammer from Austria for 3 minutes.
Dieser Bericht
Thank you very much, President. I think it's very sort of brief, succinct, but I think it expresses a principle that we can all sign up to, and that is that human rights are universal and to be enjoyed by all at all times. And that means quite clearly that everything that we have and that appears to us as important has to be preserved for future generations, because it's only in that way can we ensure that they can live in peace and security in the future. And as one of the previous speakers has said, it's important that we take up these issues those who think there are more important issues we should be discussing haven't understood that we're talking about the universality of human rights. It is of huge importance that we deal with problems of the future now. Human rights can't be pitted one against the other. We can't say, well, because we've got problems now, we're going to ignore the problems that we'll be faced with in the future. It is important that all these rights that we enjoy are preserved for future generations. It is therefore essential that we maintain life on this planet in all its diversity so that future generations can have healthy food in the future, that they have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe. It's only in that way can we ensure survival in the future, and they live in peace and freedom. And they, in turn, can continue to work to protect human rights and the human rights of their future generations. If people can't secure their own livelihood, living in a degraded environment where no food grows, there's no water to drink, they have real concerns than looking after the rights of future generations. They have to attend to their own concerns. And so we have lost in terms of human rights. So I think it's our responsibility to ensure that we preserve our natural resources. We have to ensure that future generations can live in an intact environment ecosystem, but also a system that's intact in terms of its democratic rights and principles. It's only in that way can we ensure that future generations indeed can live in freedom, peace, and security. And that is only something that we can ensure because we are setting down the rules. We're creating the rules. We're creating a system within which people live and work and within which people can indeed take up their rights and enjoy them. The European Human Rights Court, I think, has understood that. It's time for everyone to wake up and understand that. And I'm delighted that there seems to be such a consensus here that this is the greatest task ahead of us. It's only in this way can we preserve the possibilities of future generations which we enjoy today. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam. I now call Mr. Bakunets from Ukraine.
Merci. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear rapporteurs, dear members of the Assembly, it's a great honor for me to be here in this symbolic place where such the highest values, democracy and rule of law are appreciated. And it's very beautiful to think about future generations under peaceful skies in Europe. I want to underline, it's a great blessing that most European countries today live in peace and care about future generations. I absolutely agree with rapporteurs that future of next generations will depend on the decisions of politicians today. And it's very good if people who make decisions at the highest level are guided by rule of law, principles of democracy, international law, common senses. Unfortunately, not all leaders are like that. there are dictators and terrorists living next to us who want to create totalitarian empire, who do genocide against the entire nations. I'm talking about Russia and its desire to destroy Ukraine, to destroy life in Ukraine. To conclude, it's a great happiness that most European countries live in peace today. It's a result of work of brave Ukrainian army, which stopped Russia's invasion of Europe in eastern Ukraine. It's also a result of large-scale support for Ukraine from all of your countries, from all different partners, from United States, from Canada, from every of you. Thank you. And if Europe wants to have future generations in peace and values democracy and rule of law, Europe should be united. Europe must support Ukraine. We appreciate your support. Thank you for your support, dear partners, every one of you. And thank you, Mr. Reporter, for this report. Thank you very much.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much. And I now call Ms. Martínez Sejo from Spain. Luz, you have the floor. First of all, I should like to commend all the work that's been done by our rapporteurs. In an age in which a wave of extremism threatens to wipe out everything that we have achieved in recent decades in Europe, a continent whose hallmark is a defense of human rights, particularly the institutions which were created in the wake of the Second World War to defend human rights. Now, repeatedly, debates have shown that there is a rejection of migrants, an attempt to scale back the rights of women, negation of climate change, ultraliberalism, which threatens the welfare state, as well as the provision of basic services such as education, health, social services, the harassment of the LGBTI community, and other attacks on rights, without forgetting the hate speech and violence which have come increasingly to dominate our lives via social media. And that is why we need the kind of Europe that is governed by the principles of human rights, that this be our identity. And this means that we have to throw the brakes on all of these extremisms. And that is why we, as Council of Member States, need to enact legislation to consolidate these rights in our respective constitutions, as well as to legislate without forgetting that new technologies will require new legislation because they throw up new risks, and legislation will have to be adapted accordingly. Now, this report focuses on the need to protect our planet as well as our environments, to hand down a healthy world as our inheritance. It is quite clear that climate change is affecting all of our countries, some more than others. In Spain, for example, we have far more widespread heat waves, as well as more rainfall, less snow, and increasing desertification. It is clear, therefore, that we must guarantee for future generations a positive inheritance and not simply debt, which is generated by an ultra-liberal system. But above all, we must guarantee them a welfare state, health, education, and culture. And that, for that to be possible, we need to armor plate basic rights in a Charter of Human Rights, which can never be allowed to disappear. We need to involve young people. We need to promote education, and human rights education at that, because these rights are the guarantee of dignity and a future in peace and equity. So education for citizenship, education for value, sustainable education. Education isn't a silver bullet, far from it, but it hugely assists in generating social involvement and commitment. We need to be mindful of the rise in populism, violence, disenchantment with politics. We are seeing more and more people, particularly young people, unwilling to participate, and this could be a serious risk for democracy. I should like to end by mentioning three basic concepts which I think sum up my message to you, and that is we should protect young people with good education, political determination, and with the right protections. Thank you very much indeed, Madam. Now I call Mr. Mustafa Kambey from Turkey. You have the floor.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this report, highlighting important points concerning safeguarding human rights for future generations. Firstly, I would like to talk to you about climate change because it is an issue that affects the lives of not only today, but also future generations. The future of our children, grandchildren, and all humanity is shaped by the decision that we make today. Today, climate change poses a serious threat worldwide. Increasing levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are causing rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and damage to natural life. However, despite this dark picture, I believe that we need to take solution-oriented steps instead of despairing. This is that renewable energy comes into play. Renewable energy sources are derived from natural sources such as sun, wind, water, and biomass. These resources are unlimited and don't harm the environment. In the context of renewable energy, Turkey is an important example with eco-friendly policies among European countries. As Turkey, we have increased the share of our renewable energy capacity in total installed capacity to 55%. In this context, our country ranks 12th in the world and 5th in Europe. We rank first in Europe in geothermal installed capacity and second in Europe in hydroelectric power plant installed capacity. Thanks to the steps we have taken in the field of energy efficiency and renewable energy, greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to 90 million tons of carbon have been prevented annually. Finally, a transformation towards renewable energy is needed to tackle climate change and build a sustainable future. We must all play a role in this transformation and together. Thank you.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you. I now give the floor to José María Sánchez García from Spain.
Je crois qu'il n'est pas présent.
He doesn't appear to be in the chamber. We will then move to Canada. Ms. Jennifer O'Connell, you have the floor, madam.
Honourable colleagues, I'd first like to thank the rapporteur for this excellent and very important report, and for those who have prioritised this issue here at the Council. As he points out in the report, the climate crisis is the biggest existential threat facing humankind, and he states human rights and the environment are intertwined. In Canada, we recognize as well the importance of understanding the links between climate change and human rights, particularly given that climate change can create competition and conflict over basic resources, leading to scarcity-driven human migration. As a fundamental element of human rights, we believe that everyone should have a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment, just as this Assembly has reminded us. In this regard, in June 2023, Canada recognized through our modernized Canadian Environmental Protection Act that every individual in Canada has a right to a healthy environment. On this, Canada's Minister of Health has stated that developing an implementation framework for the right to a healthy environment will have great impacts on generations to come. As we have seen more intense and frequent forest fires in Canada as one example, we are also seeing the direct and long-term health impacts due to poor air quality as a result of climate events. In addition, as rightly mentioned by the rapporteur, the policy decisions that we take today will have long-lasting impacts on future generations and their human rights fulfillment. This report also raises the socioeconomic risk for future generations. I would argue that the economic burden faced by future generations will be significantly impacted due to climate change, because the cost of inaction will outweigh the investments necessary today to meaningfully address the climate crisis. Communities across Canada and around the world understand the financial impacts they face when they have to rebuild and are displaced from fires or floods, and when local economies are devastated, when industries that support entire communities, like our fisheries, are at risk due to the impacts of climate change. We cannot ignore the long-term economic impacts that climate change creates. In closing, a reality I'd also like to mention briefly, which has not been mentioned in the report, is that Indigenous, racialized, and other marginalized communities in future generations will be the most affected by climate change and by the insidious phenomenon of environmental racism. We are on the verge of passing a bill in Canada for the development of a national strategy to assess, prevent, and address environmental racism, to advance environmental justice that will contribute to a healthier and, above all, fairer environment for future generations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much. And now, in French, I have no doubt, where she's making huge progress, Anna-Kristiina Mikkonen from Finland. President, colleagues, today's political decisions will have a lasting impact on future generations and on the respect of their human rights. Intergenerational equity should therefore be a guiding principle when it comes to taking any decision that involves children, young people, and the generations that will be inheriting the planet. We need, therefore, an integrated approach which takes account of environmental concerns as well as economic, social, and cultural development. A sustainable world does not mean just responding to the needs of today's generation. A sustainable world must also guarantee that future generations will be able to meet their own needs also. The world is currently facing multiple crises that intersect and that threaten human life, means of subsistence, and the rights of current and future generations. The climate crisis has been identified as the greatest existential threat today, but we shouldn't overlook other important risks in terms of the rights of future generations, such as growing socioeconomic inequality, public health emergencies, wars and conflicts, and rapid technological progress, which compounds intergenerational solidarity and justice concerns. It is internationally recognized that current generations have the responsibility of stopping and preventing developments that could threaten the survival of future generations. We, political decision makers, are responsible for the improvement of our collective well-being for the benefit of present and future generations. We, as politicians, we need to take account of children and young people, as well as those generations not yet born who will be inheriting the world when we leave it. In the Finnish parliament, there is a statue of Väinö Aaltonen, where a woman looks at us, we, the decision makers. She has a small baby in her arms, and she is a reminder that we are taking decisions for her. Let us remind ourselves of that in all our activities. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Merci beaucoup et encore une fois, bravo.
Thank you, and once again, congratulations on your French. I give the floor now to Olena Moshenets from Ukraine. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, we thank for addressing a critically important and relevant topic on ensuring the well-being of future generations. Today, Ukraine marks its Constitution Day. This document aims to establish a fair and peaceful life for Ukraine and its people. Symbolic that we talk about future generations in such a day. Striving to provide a decent life for its future generations, Ukraine is resisting Russian aggression, which is depriving millions of children of their right to social protection, education, a healthy environment, and life. Since February 2022, 550 Ukrainian children have been killed. Serhiy from Zaporizhia became the youngest casualty of this war. His life cut short after just 2 days by a Russian missile. Our children experience traumatic events and stress, which have a psychological impact on their future well-being. They are left with no choice but to stay in bomb shelters during air raids, which negatively impacts their life. Since the start of the full-scale war, more than 5,000 cases of environmental damage have been recorded, estimated at more than 57 million euros. Wildfires across 4% of Ukraine's territory are destroying natural carbon sinks, making it such more difficult for our children to adapt to the outcomes of climate change. In addition, 70% of the tank's fresh water was lost as a result of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant explosion, and people in up to 80 settlements lost their homes, jobs, and essential services like kindergartens and schools. The list goes on and on. Urgent action is imperative. Ecological safety in the eighth point of President Zelensky peace formula, which calls on the international community to hold Russia accountable for environmental damage, as well as to restore and reconstruct, including demining. Therefore, we are sincerely grateful for the launch of the International Register of Damage. The truly historic event may become a precedent for the entire world in tackling environmental damage. We call upon the global community to join this important initiative. It is only so the solidarity of the free and democratic world that Ukrainians can receive fair compensation for the way they were forced into. We support the resolution and repeat the need to improve existing standards to protect the rights of future generations and ensure the proper function of environmental human rights. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Petra Bayer from Austria.
Ja, herzlichen Dank, Herr Präsident. Simon hat in seiner
Thank you very much indeed. Simon quite rightly said in his introduction that Europe obviously has to be part of a far broader multilateral system. And let me just give you the example of the UN in two different respects. First of all, September this year, it will hold a summit for the future in New York, and we have a document which particularly addresses the needs of future generations. And what I found particularly interesting is that future generations shouldn't necessarily be taken as meaning just young people, because future generations are also going to comprise older people. And I actually think that that was the first time that that had been clearly addressed. And I think that's extremely helpful, because we're going to have more and more old people in future. So we've got to bear them in mind increasingly in future and make sure that their needs are also met. Now, it's also important when it comes to UN to remember that there's an ongoing process to safeguard sustainable development, and the way in which we can make sure that we develop in such a way that we can live together in future and that we can have human dignity and do so for future generations, and the way in which we can implement these recommendations at national level. And for that to be the case, it's important that we work internationally to look at the various indicators, look basically at the impacts of all of our budgets and